So as usual, my tomato plants have been really productive and I've got more than I can use right now. So I'm going to need to preserve some. I could cook them up and freeze them, I could can them, I could dehydrate them, but this time around I think I'm going to ferment them. And there's a few really good ways to ferment tomatoes. The way that I'm choosing to do it today is to make a really rich and flavorful fermented tomato sauce. It's super easy, so let's get snacking. In addition to the tomatoes, I've also got some really nice homegrown basil, a couple of different varieties, so I'm going to pick some of that too because that's going to complement the tomato flavors really nicely. So here I've got 5 ripe and juicy homegrown tomatoes. I've got these cool black and red ones that are really tasty and have heaps of antioxidants, and some regular red ones. I've also got a couple sprigs of fresh basil, and to round out the flavors nicely, 1 clove of garlic. Now for the next step, we're going to need a bowl and a strainer. These tomatoes are super juicy, and while we want a fair bit of liquid in our sauce, if we keep all of that juice, it's going to be a bit too watery. I'll put that aside for now while I chop up the tomatoes. And we don't have to be too precise about this because we're going to be pureeing it all afterwards anyway, so I'm just roughly slicing them into medium-sized cubes. Then into the strainer they go. I've let them sit there for about 10 minutes or so for some of the juices to drain, but that's not going to be quite enough, so I'm just gently pushing down with my knuckles to express a little bit more of that juice. We don't want to juice them until they're completely dry, but we do want to get a little bit of that excess juice out so that the sauce isn't too runny. But you absolutely don't want to waste that juice, it's super tasty and full of nutrients. It'd make a great addition to some breakfast juice or a cocktail, but I just drank this out of the bowl straight as it is, and it was delicious. Then I'm slicing the garlic, and again, not being too fussy, just slicing it into reasonably thin strips. Now you can absolutely ferment this in a jar, but this time around I'm using vacuum bags. They're a really quick and convenient way to ferment things in an oxygen-free environment. Just make sure you start with a bag that's nice and long so it's got plenty of headspace to expand. Now to help stimulate the palate and liven up the flavors, I'm giving my tomatoes a generous crack of black pepper, and then sprinkling over the garlic slices. Following that, a handful of the basil leaves picked from the stem, and then I'm just giving that a bit of a toss to roughly combine. Then that's all going straight into the vacuum bag. I've left a generous amount of the top of the bag folded over. This will make sure that this bit doesn't get any tomato gunk on it, so we can get a nice clean seal. Then I'm placing that on a set of scales to get the weight. And I'm not too worried about the fact that I'm including the weight of the bag here. Realistically, that weight is going to be pretty tiny and really isn't going to make much of a difference to the salt calculation. Speaking of the salt calculation, I think about 2% salt should be a perfect amount to help keep the pathogens at bay and allow those good bacteria to thrive. So the weight of my ingredients, 385 grams times 0.02 equals 7.7 grams of pure sea salt. So I'm just weighing that out carefully on a very sensitive set of scales. And woo, okay, that was a bit weird. For a second there, it flashed up a completely different weight. I think it might be time to get a new set of scales. But it's back now to 7.7 grams, so I'm pretty sure that's right. So I'm throwing all of that salt into the bag with the vegetables and giving it a good massage to mix it all around, because that salt's not going to do much good if it's all sitting in one lump in the middle. Once I feel like the salt's been evenly distributed through the mix, then we can vacuum seal the bag. So as you can see, keeping that top bit folded over has given us a nice clean area where we can get a really good seal. So we're folding that back, popping the end into the vacuum sealer, setting it to moist, and then vacuum sealing everything in. Pulling all of the air out of this bag will give us a perfect oxygen-free environment, just perfect for fermentation. So after it's sealed, I'm just giving it one final massage to make sure all of that salt is still evenly distributed, and then I'm putting that in a dark place at room temperature for a few days or up to a week or so. Different fermentations will take different amounts of time, so I think the best thing to do is just to keep an eye on it, and when it looks like sufficient fermentation activity has taken place, that's about when I call it done. So this is what mine looked like after a few days. The tomatoes have started to soften up and released even more of their moisture, so you can see that even with the juice that we squeezed out, there's still a lot of juice left over. You can imagine how watery this would be if we hadn't done that step. And this is it after about a week and a half. And as you can see, the bag's inflated quite a bit with the CO2 produced. If you find your bag inflates too much and you don't think the fermentation is quite finished, you can poke a hole in it, let some of the gas out, and then reseal it. But because I've left so much headspace, I've been able to do it all in one go. So I think this is done. Let's cut it open and see how it smells. And that smells like a nice clean fermentation. It's got a beautiful fresh tomato smell, a hint of basil, and a wonderful savoury background note which is enhanced by the fermentation. And I want this to be a smooth sauce, so I'm now pouring all of this into a container and blending it until it's nice and smooth. Ooh, actually, but before I do that, I'll do a quick pH test. This isn't strictly necessary, but sometimes it's nice to know just how much the pH has reduced during the fermentation. And as you can see, the pH looks like it's well below 4, which is a really good sign as far as the fermentation goes. And at that lower pH, it's gonna last in the fridge for a really, really long time. The pH is low enough that it's probably actually shelf stable, but I'm gonna keep mine in the fridge anyway. That should make it last and keep it tasting fresh even longer. Now that that's blended, I'll give it one last taste to see if it needs anything extra, and it doesn't. It tastes absolutely fantastic. Do keep in mind that this is 2% salt, so that will make it a touch on the salty side, which does slightly reduce the number of ways in which you can use it. Obviously, you don't want to add this to something that's already salty or it'll be overpowering, but it's just perfect for adding to things that need a wonderful tomato flavor plus a little bit of seasoning. I'm going to be using this to make a healthy pizza with tons of fiber and really great macros, and once that video is done, I'll link it here. If at the time you're watching this I haven't made that video yet, YouTube will put another video here that it thinks you'll enjoy instead, and maybe come back to check out the healthy pizza video another time. But until then, happy snacking.